Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you're listening from. We're really glad that you're here. I'm Janice Kaminer-Resnick, and I'm delighted to welcome you on behalf of myself, former Congressman Mel Levine, and former LA County Supervisor Zev Yaroslavsky. That is our America at a Crossroads leadership team. A special welcome to tonight's guests, Larry Diamond and Ambassador Michael McFaul. There's so much going on in the domain of both of your expertise that we are really looking forward to being enlightened by your observations tonight and your analysis. Many thanks. It has been an extraordinarily difficult week, punctuated most tragically by the Hanukkah massacre at Bondi Beach. These are devastating times on so many levels, not the least of which is the horrific increase in anti-Semitic crimes. Our hearts are with those who lost loved ones on Bondi Beach, and our prayers are with those who were injured and are struggling to recover, both there and the folks in Providence and the Reiner family. As we conclude our 2026 programming, all of us at America at a Crossroads want to express our profound gratitude to our great audience for consistently showing up week after week. We are deeply thankful for your intelligence, your curiosity, your vigilance, and your generosity, and for the trust you place in us to convene these urgent conversations. This year, America at a Crossroads produced 52 programs featuring more than 60 distinguished guests, examining nearly every critical challenge facing our democracy. From domestic politics, policy, and law to foreign affairs, including the wars in Ukraine and Gaza. At a moment when democratic norms are under strain and the news can feel overwhelming, our aim has been to promote thoughtful civic engagement. We are especially grateful for your financial support. Your donations make this work possible, allowing us to remain independent, accessible, and committed to serious fact-based discussion. In a crowded media environment, your generosity ensures that these conversations continue to reach tens of thousands of viewers and listeners who care deeply about the future of our democracy. We hope that our programs have helped you navigate a year marked by uncertainty, fear, and disappointment, and we hope that together we can continue to draw strength from one another to sustain the resilience, resolve, and civic courage required to meet this crossroads moment and to defend and strengthen American democracy in the year ahead. Our next program is not until January 7th at 5 p.m. At that time, law professor at University of Michigan and co-host of the Strict Scrutiny podcast and best-selling author, Leah Littman, will be in conversation with Madeline Brand on the topic of her new book, Lawless: How the Supreme Court Runs on Conservative Grievance, Fringe Theories, and Bad Vibes. We wish our audience a very happy holiday season. Whatever you celebrate, however you celebrate it, we hope it is peaceful, loving, and joyful, and we wish a happy new year to all. Now, without further ado, please welcome Larry Diamond, who will lead tonight's conversation with Ambassador McFaul. Larry Diamond is one of the world's foremost scholars of democracy and democratic decline. A senior fellow at Stanford University's Hoover Institution and co-founder of the National Endowment for Democracy's Journal of Democracy, he has spent decades studying how democracies are built, how they fall, and most urgently, how they can be renewed. At a moment when democratic institutions at home and abroad are under unprecedented strain, his work helps us understand not just what's at risk, but what can be done to preserve self-government. Larry, we are so sorry for your recent loss of your sister, and we really thank you for being here with us tonight. We thank you for your work, and thank you for once again gracing us with your presence on America at a Crossroads. The show is now yours.
Thank you so much, Janice. It's so great to be part of this dialogue again, which is not just a dialogue, but has so many elements of community and even family. And if you'll permit me, I'd not only like to call out my hometown, Los Angeles in general, but her longtime community, which is represented on this call, Hidden Hills. It gives me great pleasure to introduce once again my colleague at Stanford University and the Hoover Institution, Mike McFaul, but this is the last time I will be doing so while introducing him as director of the Freeman Spogli Institute for International Studies, because after 11 transformational years in which Mike has expanded the size and impact of FSI, he is stepping down to return to his teaching and research and policy advocacy on a full-time basis. He is also the Ken Olivier and Angela Nomalini Professor of International Studies in the Department of Political Science at Stanford, the Peter and Helen Bing Senior Fellow at the Hoover Institution. He will remain a Senior Fellow at FSI, and I presume he will remain a commentator that we frequently watch on international affairs for NBC News and particularly MS Now. As you know, Mike served for 5 years in the Obama administration, first as special assistant to the president and senior director for Russian and Eurasian affairs at the NSC at the White House from 2009 to 2012, and then as U.S. ambassador to the Russian Federation from 2012 to 2014. That resulted in his very widely read and much discussed book, From Cold War to Hot Peace, an American ambassador in Putin's Russia. But he has just produced a new book called, which speaks to the broader struggle we are in now, and that is going to constitute the focus of this hour of discussion, called Autocrats versus Democrats, China, Russia, America, and the New Global Disorder. And I'm not sure how well this shows up on the camera, but I can tell you that it is available for purchase on Amazon. So, Mike, I know you don't like long introductions, so let's get right to it in terms of the conversation. You and I have been talking for a long time about the way the world has been changing since really you left office, you and the Obama administration. And that change now seems to be accelerating with the withdrawal of the United States more vigorously from its global responsibilities in the second Trump administration, and the increasingly aggressive push of what you call the autocrats, but most especially Russia and China, not just to push their own aggressive ambitions, but really to transform the world order from what we have called for a long period of time, and really what began to emerge after World War II as a liberal international order with certain norms and institutional mechanisms to affirm what we hope would be democracy, human rights, development, peace, and so on, into something much more dangerous and much more reminiscent of the first 45 years of the 20th century. So, your book is a very bold analysis of what's been going on and, how we should meet the challenge. Why don't you tell us what the core thesis of your book, Autocrats versus Democrats, is, and then we'll move back through history and back to the present to unpack it.
Well, thanks, Larry. Thanks for having me. Janice, Akin, and Mel, if you're still there. It's great to be back with you all. This is a fantastic organization. I'm looking at the numbers. It's shocking how many people show up here, and it's always an honor to be here, especially when I get to talk to my good friend Larry Diamond about things that I care a lot about, and we need to analyze them, but also have some ideas about making the world a better place. The book, Larry, as you know, it took me forever to write. I've been writing this book for several years, partly because I have a day job. I don't have full time just to write books. And the purpose of it actually changed over time. But and maybe we'll come back to that in a minute. But the main structure of the book is in three different parts. For those who haven't bought it yet, the first part is historical, and it explains the ups and downs of U.S.-China relations and U.S.-Russia relations over 250 years. That section, by the way, used to be several hundred pages long, but don't freak out, everybody. And they're now just 30 pages each. I've boiled all that history down, so you and ChatGPT don't have to. But I did that on purpose, Larry, because I wanted to look at not just periods of confrontation, which we're in now with respect to Russia and China, but to look in history and to see if there were periods of cooperation. And by looking at three different factors, we would call them independent variables in political science: power, regime type, and individuals. I trace how those three variables interact to sometimes push towards cooperation, sometimes towards confrontation. The second part of the book looks at all three of those variables and shows that they line up mostly in a confrontational way. Although we're going to get to President Trump and the ups and downs of his foreign policy that have changed 3 or 4 times since I published the book. But basically, I look at these chapters. I have 3 chapters on the balance of power, and I show that the balance has been shifting towards China in particular, Russia as well. But I also show that America still has a lot of power, especially if we're united with our allies. So I look at that first in the contemporary piece. Then I look at regime type. And I do think there is an ideological struggle underway between China, the United States, and Russia. And before the second Trump administration, I would say there's a divide between autocrats and Democrats. And so I trace what all those countries are doing in that race. The caveat that since President Trump has been reelected a second time, I got to be honest with you, he kind of jumps in between. Sometimes he's on the side of the autocrats and sometimes not. And that's a very confusing new part of the new world that we're living in. And then the third part of that snapshot is to the point you already raised, where I look at the different conceptions of the global order and I think the fierce struggle, especially between China and the United States. And that's the kind of assessment of the world as it is today. One of the main arguments I make there is that China, of course, has more capabilities than Russia does. And therefore, on many dimensions, they're in terms of great power competition, the greater challenge that we, the United States, have and we, the free world, have. But I think we've made an error. And remember, I started writing this book in 2015. I finished a complete draft of this book before Putin invaded Ukraine, or let me be more precise, before he launched his full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, because he started that war in 2014. And one of the arguments I make is because when we just focus on capabilities and not on intentions, we somehow think that China's the only threat. And I wrote this before 2022, but I'm here to say that just because Putin doesn't have the same capabilities as Xi Jinping and the Communist Party of China, he has used lesser capabilities in, I think, much more threatening ways to the international system and to democratic countries around the world. And we'll come back to that if you want to break that down. The last part of the book is about prescriptions. And if there are aspects to this great power competition that are like the Cold War, and I go through them in the book, I think there are some things that are similar, some things that are different. Maybe that's why it took me 500 pages to get through it all, because I don't think it's black and white. Some things are similar and some things are different. But on the similarities part, which I think there are many, can we learn some lessons from the Cold War? So I have one chapter on mistakes we made in the Cold War we shouldn't repeat again. I have a second chapter on successes from the Cold War that we should replicate. And then I have an ending chapter, which is things that are completely different. And this is especially regarding China, that have nothing to do with the Cold War. And if we superimpose that metaphor, we're not going to develop, I think, smart, effective strategies for dealing with the threat that comes from the autocratics, the great power autocrats that I think are real threats to American power and ideals today.
So I want to, before we dig into, what we should borrow from the past and what we should avoid from the past, I want to ask you this. I'll give away something here by saying that you're obviously pro-American engagement with the world
Yes.
and pro building on and strengthening our alliances,
Yep.
particularly our alliances based on common values. And we'll come back to that and elaborate on it. But why should ordinary Americans care? I mean, let me play devil's advocate for a moment. And it's probably going to be similar to what you have heard in some of the very red and rural cities that you have been speaking at as you've been on your book tour in the last few weeks. Uh, we have a crisis with healthcare. We're shedding jobs. The economy is tanking. We have a growing and shocking proportion of income in the United States controlled by the top 10% of income earners and even the top 1%. A lot of Americans are just struggling to pay their food bills. We definitely have a massive affordability crisis. So why should some struggling family in the middle of Kansas, frankly, care other than, for sentimental reasons, uh, if Putin swallows Ukraine, or frankly, if China moves against Taiwan, or if, the World Bank and, well, USAID is gone, but if it had survived or failed, if the UN survives or remains in the United States on American soil, what the heck does it matter to Americans who are, struggling just to pay their bills and, hold things together?
So thanks, Larry. That's the fundamental question. So I'm glad we're starting with it. And you're right. My book came out in October, and I've been on the road. I don't know if you know that Johnny Cash song. I've been everywhere, man. I've been everywhere. But I have been all over the country: Hudson, Ohio; Erie, Pennsylvania; Columbia, South Carolina; 4 trips to Texas; Santa Fe, New Mexico; Pullman, Washington. That's a place I've never been before. I'll be speaking, if anybody's on this call from Bozeman, I'll be in Bozeman, Montana on Monday. Senator Tester might stop by the way. I was just on a podcast with him today. And then next week, after the new year, I'll be in Idaho, Utah. I'm actually going to the university where Charlie Kirk was assassinated, and several other places because
Starting to sound like the Johnny Cash song.
yeah, I'm trying. I do have other responsibilities here, but I want to take these arguments to these places that, Stanford professors don't normally go. And I'm going to answer your question, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I've learned.
Mhm.
So the answer that I give in the book is it would be great if we lived in a world where we didn't have to care about what happened overseas, and we had enough money and resources, and the oceans were big enough that we could just focus on what's happened here in the United States. But that's not the world we live in. And I think the 20th century should have taught us that, tragically, that that's not the world we lived in. For this book, I did a lot of reading. I thought I knew a lot about the Cold War. I thought I knew a lot about the interwar period. But to write this book, I really, did some deep dives back into this literature and this history. And the interwar period in particular, I had to learn some things I didn't know about. By the way, the fascist movements in America, I grossly underestimated them. I was not taught that at Bozeman Senior High School. I strongly urge everybody to go read that history. And a really quick read is Rachel Maddow's fantastic book,
Yeah.
Prequel. Just
Amazing.
I got to tell you honestly, and Rachel has different views. You can argue about that on different things, but this is a real piece of history. And I got to tell you, a lot of it I didn't know.
I
Likewise,
didn't either until I read her book.
just a fantastic book. And in the same spirit of advertising other people's books, not my own, Bob Kagan, pretty ideologically different, I think, from Rachel, has this fantastic book on the foreign policy of the interwar period that I highly recommend. Go Set the Feast. I'll look at it and grab it in a minute. But that is where I start. Because if you go back to the 30s, when there was a lot of hardship in America, a lot more than there is today. Millions and millions of Americans were saying exactly the arguments that you are making, right?
Not our fight.
Not our fight. Ethiopia, where is that? I don't even know where that is. That's the Italians, right? Japanese went into China, and people said, "Why do we care? That's not. We have no dog in that fight." And then, more amazingly to me, Hitler went into Poland, and then Stalin went into Poland, And still, millions of Americans said, that's not our fight. And then that fight got bigger, and millions of Americans said, that's not our problem. And then tragically, it became our problem on December 7th in 1941. And I think, I'm echoing historians and Kagan in particular, had we thought we had dogs in those fights and we were more engaged from the beginning, we might have avoided the tragedy that was World War II. So that's where I start. Second thing, think about everybody listening. And, there's some squirrely cases and some vague cases here. We can talk about the War of 1812 if you want. But if you think about it, every enemy of the United States has been a dictatorship over the course of all of our history. Now, we've had some monarchies and autocracies that have been our allies, including the French going all the way back to the beginning of our republic. Of course, we've done that. We have some autocracies that are friendly to the United States today. That's true. But all of our enemies have been dictatorships. And some in our field, as you know, Larry, argued, well, it's the rise of great powers. That's the whole thing. And it doesn't really matter what's inside. I just disagree with that. That's a misreading of global history.
Me too, yeah.
Germany is way more powerful today than they were in 1945. I'm not worried about going to war with them. Same with the Japanese. But why am I worried about China? Because they're an autocracy and they don't share our values. Russia, when it was more democratic, was not as threat as Putin's dictatorship is. So that part, you can ignore it, but ignore it at your peril. And then the last thing I will say, and I can go deeper in this, but we're better off stopping these threats over there so that we don't get dragged in to wars if, God forbid, they should attack our allies and partners. So let's start with Ukraine. I want to help the Ukrainians to do all they can to stop the Russian army in eastern Ukraine so that we don't, 2 to 3 or 4 or 5 years from now, get dragged into a war when Russia, after their victory in Ukraine, attacks Lithuania. And that is not...
Explain that, Mike, why Lithuania's NATO membership would trigger that.
Right, because they're a member of NATO. Article 5 commitment says an attack on one is attack on all. And their ability to fight the Russian army is much more constrained than the Ukrainian army is now. So just you don't even have to care about values. You could just care about security. Why is it's much more rational for us to support Ukrainian warriors who, by the way, they don't want our soldiers. They don't want American soldiers. All they want is the means to defend their country. That, to me, seems like a really good bet so that we don't have to fight the Russian army if they get so powerful after their win in Ukraine that they decide to march on. And study that part of the world, and you will know that that has happened time and time again with Nazi Germany and with Stalin's Soviet Union. They march until they can't march any further. Same thing in Asia. And again, Larry, you're the expert, not me, but I want to avoid a war with China over the island of Taiwan. I think that is a paramount national security interest that all Americans should embrace. And the way to avoid war over Taiwan is to deter war. And that means us giving more military assistance to the government of Taiwan and to help them get more prepared. Again, Larry, you're the expert, so I feel you should jump in. You're the expert, I'm not. But the things that the prime minister in Japan said recently that everybody's apoplectic about, I celebrate that. And I'm disappointed that President Trump is not supporting her because I think deterrence works. And if we begin to get wobbly, that's when bad things happen. And I'm with Ronald Reagan on this. Peace through strength. Keep strong, keep deterrence, keep our allies close. I'm deeply, deeply disappointed by the damage we're doing to our allies, especially in NATO, especially in Europe and Canada. We'll come back to that later. Because for a simple reason that if our allies are strong, that helps us deter China and Russia. But if we begin to look wobbly, that is tempting for Putin. That is tempting to Xi Jinping. And that's when we could get dragged into a war that I think could be avoided.
All right. Let's look a little bit more deeply about the lessons from the Cold War. And first, let's dig into the deterrence element. And then I want to ask you about the global architecture element. On the deterrence element, what exactly were we deterring during the Cold War? And say a little bit more about why you think we succeeded.
So we were deterring communism, and we had a doctrine called containment. It was a very elastic term, I think, and I write about that in the book. Let's not be.
Wasn't that also kind of, didn't that end badly in places in terms of, fighting communists on every continent
Yep,
when we didn't really need to?
exactly. And in my mistakes of the Cold War chapter, I talk precisely about that. And in my view, that was a mistake. That too big of an idea about containment, whether we're talking about McCarthyism here at home or Vietnam abroad, that was a mistake. And we conflated nationalism with communism, and we can't do that again. And I want to be clear, Larry, it is not easy to make these determinations, right? I want to be really clear about that, thinking about where we need to contain Chinese influence and not. But we have to strive to do it, in part because we didn't need to have expansive containment in retrospect. That was a mistake. By the way, one of the mistakes I talk about, in the name of containing containment globally, we decided that all sorts of horrible regimes were our allies because they were anti-communist. Apartheid regime in South Africa is the one I know the best because I wrote my PhD about it. We didn't need to do that to win the Cold War. We didn't need to call Jonas Savimbi a Jeffersonian Democrat in Angola to do that. And I worry about those mistakes moving forward. And by the way, I also worry that we're not learning those mistakes today. We have a lot of people that think, well, we won the Cold War, let's just replay the game and we're going to win again, because we did win the Cold War. We had a lot of help, by the way, from Poles and Hungarians and Estonians and Ukrainians and even Russians that rose up against communism. They get left out of the story. But I compare this, the analogy I have, Larry, because you know him, so I don't think he'll care that I'm going to tell 1.5 thousand people this. But my son Luke, he's a basketball player. And when I was a U.S. ambassador to Russia, I had the privilege and honor of coaching Luke's third grade basketball team. I think I'm the only ambassador before or since who ever did that, right? And my whole entourage of security guards would come. We had a pretty big footprint. But Luke was the star of our basketball team. And you know why? Because Luke grew up in America, and in winter sports, Americans play basketball, and he moved to a country where third graders play hockey. Luke's actually a good basketball player. He plays on the women's basketball practice squad, so everybody knows. But our play, Larry, was pass Luke the ball and everybody get out of the way. That was our offense. And you'd say, oh, that's so unfair. Those Russian kids didn't touch the ball. Let me tell you, the Russian kids didn't want to touch the ball because they
wanted to win.
They wanted to win, and they would turn over the ball 9 times out of 10. So that was our play. If Luke got 3 fouls in the second quarter and I had to sit him down, which happened from time to time, and we won, everybody forgot about the mistakes in the second quarter. And that, I think, is happening right now with these metaphors about the Cold War. We're forgetting about those mistakes, and those 3 in particular: overreach, looking for enemies at home, and embracing dictators are at the top of the list. But I also want to get to successes because the list is much longer. Number 1, allies. We developed fantastic allies. We invested in them in Asia and in Europe in particular, and that was our superpower over the Soviet Union. They were real allies. They weren't coerced like the Soviets did to theirs, and we won the Cold War because of allies, and we need allies to win again. And this is the biggest mistake President Trump is making. Some of my friends who know Trump better than I do, they say, Mike, stop getting overworked. He's not really going to invade Greenland. He's not really going to invade Canada.
But he could
That's
really destroy NATO.
yeah, and those acts do that, folks. Just so you know, I have friends in Canada. I have friends in Denmark. This is doing damage to the one superpower that we have over the Chinese and Russians because they don't have great allies. Number two, economic power. We won the Cold War in part because our economy outperformed the Soviet economy. West Germany outperformed East Germany. We got to do that again. There's some good news there. Our economy is growing. I don't know if it's because of or in spite of Trump policies. We can come back to that in a minute. But I worry about the long term. I worry, another big growth piece during the Cold War was investments in some of the best research universities in the world, including our own here at Stanford. Big reason we won the Cold War. We're blowing that up. Immigration, another superpower we had. We could attract the smartest, most interesting people around the world, including, by the way, from communist China, from the Soviet Union. And that helped to grow our economy. We're now screwing that up. And when our government celebrates that we're reducing the number of international students here, I just look at that and say that's a problem. And then three, I could go on forever. I'll just stop with three and get to other questions. Three, it was our ideas, right? So we had military power, and that came with economic power. I should have mentioned that with our allies. We outlasted the Soviets. We were more powerful. We had economic power, more powerful, and we still, if you add us all up, the free world, we still have more economic power than the autocratic world. And then three, ideational power. We made mistakes, and I want people to understand. I have lots of chapters and subheadings on the mistakes, including even after the Cold War, including the war in Iraq that Larry has written so eloquently about. But we also did some really smart things in terms of our soft power instruments, things like USAID, things like Voice of America, Radio Free Europe, and later Radio Free Asia, the National Endowment for Democracy that Ronald Reagan helped to create, Larry worked very closely with. All of those things helped us to prevail in the Cold War. And all of those instruments of soft power are going to be essential to continue to compete with autocratic China and Russia. And right now, President Trump is unilaterally disarming. That's the only way I can describe it. So he just blew up USAID. Chinese are not blowing up the Belt and Road Initiative. They're expanding it. He just reduced all our diplomats by 10%. Chinese increased our diplomats. He wants to tear down Voice of America, Radio Free Asia, Radio Free Europe. They're just barely surviving. Voice of America, excuse me. Russia Today, they're expanding. And I could go through even other lists, right? Even softer things like Fulbright exchanges. Those are things we need to invest in. And tragically, this administration does not understand that.
Well, if you listen to Susie Wiles, it was just a kind of oops, Elon Musk overreach with too many ketamine tablets that
Wow.
led to the demise of USAID. It's not something she thought was a good idea or that they actually intended to do. It's just oops, there
Wow.
goes our international development assistance effort around the world.
That is
So
tragic to hear. I haven't read the interview, but that is tragic to
everyone
hear.
on this call should read that Vanity Fair interview. It's absolutely shocking and a powerful testimony to the chaos and uh, just aimlessness of this administration. So, uh, let's think for a minute about the systemic effort of this. Some of the international institutions that sustained what could be called a liberal international order.
Yes.
And, what is going to be the fate of all this, and how do we sustain it with the wrecking ball that is this administration?
So analytically, Larry, I want to be honest. I don't know. I know what I prescriptively write about in the book, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But I want to be clear about this. I just don't know what the future holds. some of the more critical reviews of my book said, "Oh, this guy, he's just some old liberal white dinosaur from the 1990s. He doesn't understand the real world." And that may be true. I hope I get to see play out over 20 or 30 years if that's true or not. I do know a couple of things that we've been here before. This is not the first moment when ideas of liberal democracy were, considered dinosaur ideas. If you go back and you read during the interwar period, it was either fascism or communism that was going to prevail. People thought like me, we were part of the past. That turned out to be premature. Then in the late 60s, early 70s, Marxism, Leninist regimes were taking over all over the place, right? Southeast Asia, Angola, Mozambique, Nicaragua. And we had a lot of domestic polarization here. Democracy was not performing so well. And it was the same thing that was said about, small L liberals and small D Democrats. You guys are just passe. You don't understand anything. That was not me. I'm not that old. But that was said about them. And this feels like, okay, we got out of that just 20 years later. The Soviet Union collapsed and the whole world wanted to be democratic. So that doesn't mean that's going to happen again, but it's happened in the past. We should remember that. And then as in the end of the book, I write about and in the long stretch, hundreds of years of history, the trajectory is still on the side of freedom. If you go back 300 or 400 years, the data I think is pretty clear, but it doesn't mean it's going to happen automatically. And it most certainly doesn't mean it's not going to happen without a fight. It's not just going to happen organically. We have to engage in that fight. And part of it, I'm sorry for that preamble, but part of it has to be about international institutions. We, after World War II, rightly, we, the United States of America, decided we don't want to keep fighting wars of annexation. We don't want to keep fighting where millions and millions of people are going to die in Europe. And so we created some institutions to try to prevent that in the future, United Nations being one of them. And it was imperfect, didn't work that well, had some serious flaws, especially during the Cold War. But decolonization and sovereignty and anti-annexation were two norms that took hold in the 1940s, and I think were very positive. Larry, when I teach a course about this stuff, I start, sometimes I start my class with a map of Europe that is 1,000 years of European history that plays in 6 minutes. And what you see there is just the borders changing, right? The Mongols come, the Turks come, Napoleon comes, the Nazis come, the Soviets come, the borders changing, lots of chaos, lots of people die. And then you get to 45 and it stops.
That stops.
And it freezes. And it wasn't perfect, but a whole lot better than what came before it. So what I worry about today with the Trump administration is that they're just withdrawing from everything. They're just pulling out of everything. The president's speech at the United Nations is like, why should we care? What do you guys do? They're pulling out of other multilateral organizations. And they started this in the first term. And I worry about two things. One, the Chinese aren't pulling out. They're not leaving. They're going to capture these institutions if we pull out. And two, and this worries me even more, during the Cold War, it wasn't just international institutions. I want to be really clear about this. This is sometimes a mistake that I even make in talking about it. It wasn't the liberal international order. It was actually, that was one set of institutions, but then we had other institutions that united the free world. So NATO was in place of the UN Security Council because it didn't provide that. World Bank and the IMF helped to unite the free world. And that was a fantastic investment, that the free world was more united and then more secure and more prosperous. We need to be doing that again. I think I quote you, Larry. I don't know if it lasted in the book because I had to cut 75% of the book out. But at one point I said, when Trump pulled out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, you said this, that was one of the greatest mistakes ever. I completely agree. And that was a multilateral organization that brought together the free world that we just pulled out of. Here is the problem. The Chinese are creating their own regional organizations that are now becoming international. Shanghai Cooperation Organization, BRICS, RECEP, Belt and Road Initiative, AIB. I go through all of them in the book. And you know what? They're the center country. And oftentimes they're mostly autocrats. And we are sleeping on this. This is one of the things I think is most dangerous about the world, because we're just thinking, oh, these things don't matter. And that, I think, is extremely dangerous.
Great. Mike, I'll give you a chance at the end of this conversation for a kind of closing view about the book, but we have, as could be predicted, with not 1,500 but 1,900 participants,
1900. Okay. I don't have my
quite a
glasses
lot
on.
of questions, so I apologize
Yeah,
that
let's
most
go
of them
through
we
them.
won't
I'll try to be
get
quick
to.
too.
But let's try and get very contemporary and very concrete. One of the really agonizing and moving places, manifestations of the difficult choices that have to be made is in the ongoing drama in Venezuela, where the Democrats, led by the Nobel Prize winner this year, Maria Corina Machado, an extraordinary woman, but who was banned from running. So she handed the campaign over to her designee, Edmundo Gonzalez. They won decisively in July of 2024, probably capturing about 70% of the vote. The vote was rigged. Chavez's successor, Nicolas Maduro, has refused to leave. And now we've got this armada off the coast of Venezuela trying to strangle his regime into some kind of submission. On the one hand, you can look at this and say, you want us to stand up for values of freedom. There was a democratic election. We're trying to force out the authoritarian regime. And the goal, Trump won't admit it, but I think Rubio would in private be very explicit about this, is regime change. On the other hand, all I have to say is Iraq to present the other side of the story. And I think you also have another observation that we've been in conversation about the precedent that this could have in terms of justifications China could draw uh, for possible military action against Taiwan. So why don't you opine a bit about where we're at now in terms of the military standoff off the coast of Venezuela and the competing values that it evokes?
Yeah, that's a very hard question. And Larry, I want to hear more of your answer too, because you've been following this very closely. Um, and let me just say a couple of things so people understand where I come from. Maduro has to go. He was not elected in a free and fair election, and that's my personal view. He's an illegitimate leader there. President Gonzalez should be instated. I agree with that. The question is, and let's just go back historically. I do think the international community and the free world missed a great opportunity when that election happened, and it was documented, as you know well, Larry, in a way that it's extremely hard to do. I think this is probably the most well documented falsified election in the world that I know of.
Yeah.
And I've studied a lot of them, by the way. I've written about them. It was just clear as day. It was stolen. That was the moment for us to use ultimate pressure. The Biden administration and the entire free world, and I think we missed an opportunity there. But that's for the historians to decide. My view is we should use all instruments available to put as much pressure on the Maduro regime to bring about a peaceful transition to democracy, short of military invasion. And when I look at having studied other cases, having participated in these debates about Syria and about Libya when I worked at the White House, we have not exhausted all available instruments. So I won't go through them all, but just one, there's all kinds of other economic sanctions that we could do. I do not believe we should be seizing Venezuelan oil for ourselves. That seems absurd to me. But the Iran the Iran sanctions is a really useful alternative that should be studied, where that was set up in a way. And there's this great book by Eddie Fishman called Choke Points. I just, in the spirit of advertising other books, just read it. It's the best book ever written about sanctions that I've read. And he explains it, where the Iranian oil was left to go out, but the money didn't go back to Iran. They went into third accounts that would only be released after they signed the Iran nuclear deal. And then everybody politicized it and said Obama's handing money to the mullahs. But no, that wasn't the case. That was Iranian money. This seems to me to be super easy to do, especially when you have those ships there. And then that money just accumulates, and it puts pressure and helps the opposition to say it gets released when they take over. Another idea that is not, unless it's happening behind closed doors. But Larry, as you know better than I, there are all kinds of scenarios where through quiet negotiation with the military, with the intelligence services, there's a way to push autocrats out and to let them go. And it's not pretty, but I participated in this in Egypt in 2011. And, when there were massive demonstrations saying Mubarak must go, there was a strategy to push him aside. Now, that didn't end well. We know that, right? We made mistakes after that. But that, I think, is another scenario where you split the Ancient regime. You split the old order and you say, flip over and we're going to give you amnesty. We're going to keep paying you, but you can no longer be loyal to Maduro and get him to leave. Belarus is a place where these guys go all the time, by the way. Bakiev's there from Kyrgyzstan. Lukashenko's already said he'd be welcome there. That's another piece that we could do. Why? But to your point, and then I want to hear your answer too, if we have time. Why I'm nervous about invasion. And I want to also say, before saying that, Venezuela also has some advantages over places like Iraq or Libya. They've had democracy before. That's a big plus. Pretty unified, in terms of there's not ethnic cleavages and religious cleavages. That's another big advantage we know about from studying in comparative transitions. I think there could be this windfall of money that could come through investment and releasing the oil sector there. Those are all the pluses. But the minuses of using military power are, I think, very high. And by the way, if I was a Venezuelan, I'd be pushing for it. I get it. We have friends that if I were them, I would have exactly their position. But I'm an American. And so I worry about other interests we have. Number one, I worry about American casualties. This idea that it's going to be a cakewalk, I'm sorry, folks, we've heard this before, including, Larry, you're the expert on Iraq, but I remember how easy that was going to be. It wasn't easy. I was part of when we went into Libya. Now everybody talks about, this was inevitable that this state was weak and these ethnic cleavages. Go back and read what people said in the beginning of that. That's not what they were saying in the beginning of it. And I worry that people will die. But the thing I worry most about, I don't believe that President Trump cares about democracy in Venezuela. I see no evidence anywhere else in the world that he cares about democracy. He most certainly doesn't care about it in Russia or Belarus, China. I just don't see the evidence for it. So if the going gets tough, and you gotta gut it out to help the Democrats take power, maybe it won't be that way. Maybe it'd be like Panama. But if it does, I worry he will just pull out in a heartbeat, and that could lead to a worse outcome.
Yeah, well, we got a lot of questions, so I won't extend this conversation too much, but I will just say a couple of things. Number one, I'm not nervous about a U.S. invasion of Venezuela in terms of the consequences it would have. I'm totally and flatly opposed to it under any circumstance. I watched this happen in Iraq. I think it would be disastrous for any kind of political stability in Iraq, for the security situation on the ground, and for the legitimacy of the United States in
Yes,
Latin
I
America
left
and
that out. I left
globally.
that out. Yeah, I meant to get
And
to
the
that.
demonstration effect, the lesson the PRC would claim to draw
Yes,
with respect to Taiwan would be really alarming. I'm already worried that they may claim they now have a precedent to seize shipping going into Taiwan
yes,
because of what we've done with the Venezuelan oil tankers.
yes.
And the second thing is, you're absolutely right. I think that we've got to split the regime. All of the lessons of successful, peaceful transitions from this kind of dictatorship show that, and we have to pull the military away from the regime. And if we offer selective amnesty for a large number of them, offer the ringleaders of the regime safe passage with their filthy wealth to Belarus or Cuba or wherever, and I would pick out 100 senior commanders and send them a text message with the contact information sitting in the CIA saying X amount of money is going to be waiting for you in your bank account if you defect. And oh, by the way, the cost of that would be a fraction of an invasion. Okay, Mike, there are a lot of questions about one of the areas you know best and have been working on longest, Ukraine. And so I'm going to ask a slightly historical one and then a contemporary one, and I'll ask them together for reasons of time.
Okay.
Lauren asks, if I can just put it pointedly, well, you were honest. The first invasion happened in 2014. I think that's when you were working for President Obama. And what if President Obama had responded more aggressively to Russia's occupation of the Crimea and, the kind of more surreptitious invasion of the Donbass back then? Is
Yeah.
that maybe analogous to, are not doing anything in Munich and the invasion of Poland being the result? I've just extended the question. And then there's another question about the current moment and Europeans saying that if President Zelensky did agree to surrender territory now under duress, a lot of European leaders think war with Russia would be inevitable. So, what's your take on those two Ukrainian questions?
Yeah, yeah, great questions. And I go into them in detail in my book, just so everybody knows.
We've
But the
got about
quick
four
answer,
minutes.
quick
Uh,
on the first question, the answer is yes. Now, just so everybody knows, I was not in the government when Putin took Crimea. I left the day before that, just so you know, Moscow. But we knew it was coming. But I just so formally I wasn't there. But we did make. I was still with the government. We should have given the Ukrainians. We should have had more comprehensive sanctions against Russia and more weapons to the Ukrainians. I believe that strongly. I also believe that George W. Bush, when Russia invaded Georgia in 2008, should also have done that. There was no sanctions and no weapons for the Georgians. And had we done that, then I think that would have made it easier for President Obama and the Europeans, because it was all coordinated with the Europeans, Angela Merkel in particular, to do it in 2014. So I think, and I would even go back to the 90s, we should have expanded NATO faster and armed those countries faster for deterrence all the way back in the 1990s. That was a mistake. With respect to the negotiations now, I just first want to say I just think I applaud President Trump for trying to end this war. I even agree with them that he has to speak to Putin and the Russians to try to end the war. I just think his strategy so far has been fundamentally flawed. His strategy so far has been to listen to what Putin wants and then to take that to the Ukrainians and ask them to capitulate. And I won't go through the list in the interest of time, but I dare anybody to email me or tell me on social media one concession, one single concession that all of these negotiations have achieved from Putin. Unless it's happened behind closed doors, I haven't seen it. And therefore, you have to have coercion as well, coercive diplomacy. If we were arming the Ukrainians and we were sanctioning the Russians to a greater degree, I think that would give us more leverage. And to the exact question that the Europeans worry about, they are very worried exactly about that question. If you just capitulate now and you acquiesce, next up will be other countries in Europe. And that's why they rightly are trying to help Ukraine avoid that. And one more footnote, just so we're clear. Putin he's not just asking Trump to pressure Zelensky to give him the territory that he now occupies in Ukraine. He's asking Zelensky to give him the parts of Donbass that Ukrainian soldiers now occupy. Just think about what an outlandish demand that is.
Yeah, it's sickening. So let me just observe something that our late great colleague, friend, and distinguished public servant at the Hoover Institution, former Secretary of State George Shultz often said in reinforcement of your point. He often referred to the eagle that is the symbol of the United
Yes.
States, and that in one set of claws is an olive branch, and in another set, a set of arrows that represents our military power and our willingness to use force when necessary. And the combination is precisely the coercive diplomacy that Schultz felt so strongly
Yeah.
was the essence of American strength. Mike, we've got about 3 minutes left, so I want to close with a combined appeal to you. Number one, give you a chance to say any kind of concluding thought you have in terms of how you end your book and what your vision is for American foreign policy going forward. And if in the context of that, you have any thoughts on, if I can just put it as bluntly as possible, how the hell are we going to survive the next 3 years with this guy leading American foreign policy?
Oh, that's a hard question to end on. I don't know the answer. I just was looking to make sure I quote myself. The epilogue of my book is called Don't Bet Against America Yet. And within that, I say, don't bet against small d Democrats around the world
Yeah.
yet. I still think we have more power, military and economic, than the autocrats if we are united. And I mean united inside America as well. And I still think ideas of democracy are better than dictatorship. Churchill was right. Horrible system of government, except for all the others tried. And that gives me hope. And third, Larry, and you know most of these people as well, part of what I end my book on is not just lots of data. I have tons of data in the book and lots of tables about why, the analytics are on our side. But I've also had the privilege of knowing Venezuelan opposition leaders and President Zelensky and Alexei Navalny inside Russia and all of Belarusians, Svetlana Tsikhanovskaya, who we've hosted here at Stanford. You just spend an hour with people like that, you want to be on their side. You don't want to be on the side of Putin and those guys. So that's a piece of it. Like, it's going to be a fight, and get on the right side of the fight. And that also pertains to the fight here at home. We are in, again, Larry, you're the expert, I'm not, but this is the biggest, hardest fight for democracy in America in my lifetime. And I want to be crystal clear about this. I am not talking about what the tax rate should be. We should duke that out in a policy sense between, Republicans and Democrats and independents. I'm talking about the rules of the game. I don't want to be duking it out about the rules of the game of democracy. That is not in the long-term interests of my country the way I see it.
Right.
But we got to fight for them. And I'm cautiously optimistic. I think we have better ideas than the autocratic forces inside the United States. The institutions have bent, but they haven't broken. People are voting. People are coming out in the millions against the No Kings demonstrations. And that's the last thing I'll end on. People ask me always to compare, Putin's Russia to Trump's Russia, and there are lots of parallels in the early phases. There was this very famous TV show called Puppets that Putin took off the air, and when they took Jimmy Kimmel off the air, I said that's exactly like Putin. But you know what? Then they put
Kimmel's
Jimmy
back
Kimmel
on the
back
air.
on the air because millions of Americans said we want him on the air, and I canceled my subscription too. And the other piece of that is the no kings thing. The Russians didn't have 2 centuries worth of experience of fighting for these institutions. We do, and that makes me optimistic about the long term.
Great. Well, Mike, thank you so much. In the process, you've spoken to Casey's question. Is it time to start acting like a dissident movement? And, basically, how bad a situation are we in internally in the US? And I'll just conclude by saying I completely agree with you. And I think the tide is turning in the United States. And it's turning because of massive civic mobilization, but also because of massive electoral mobilization.
Yes.
And we're not Russia. Elections still matter in the United States. And this is a nonpartisan endeavor here. But when people express their views and stand up for their values peacefully in the streets and in their community organizations and in their shared spaces, but ultimately at the ballot box, democracy is defended and I think is going to be recovered. Mike
Hey, Larry, can
McFaul,
I say one last
yeah.
thing? I know we're over, but one of the things that inspires me is webinars like this one. I just had to look to see 1.6 thousand people here. That means there may be 3,000 or 4,000 because you're together. And everywhere I've gone on my book tour,
Mhm.
Erie, Pennsylvania, 650 people showed up. Columbia, South Carolina, 500 people showed up. Hudson, Ohio, 400 people came. And I tell you, people want to be engaged in these conversations, and it's civil society that inspires me most of all, including this particularly very special thing that is going on this webinar right now.
Yes, I've thought of this before. I think I've said it once. Alexis de Tocqueville would very much admire this online series, America at a Crossroads. We do have to close now. We encourage you to continue to engage America at a Crossroads and to support it if you can, to rejoin us 3 weeks from tonight when Leah Littman will talk about her book in conversation with Madeline Brand, and you can see the different superb sessions that will follow at the beginning of next year. I do want to thank the great team that produces this. Most of all, our beloved leader and friend Janice Kamener-Resnick, and also Mel Levine, Zev Yaroslavsky, who couldn't be with us tonight. I want to thank everyone for being such a loyal participant in this series. I wish you all a happy Hanukkah, a Merry Christmas, a safe and happy New Year. Thank you all so much.